In the light of all this, here's what I want you to do. While I'm locked up here, a prisoner for the Master, I want you to get out there and walk. Better yet, run on the road God called you to travel. I don't want any of you sitting around on your hands. I don't want anyone strolling off down some path that goes nowhere. And mark that you do this with humility and discipline, not in fits and starts, but steadily pouring yourselves out for each other in acts of love, alert at noticing differences and quick at mending fences. You are all called to travel on the same road and in the same direction, so stay together both outwardly and inwardly. You have one Master, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who rules over all, works through all, and is present in all. Everything you are and think and do is permeated with oneness. But that doesn't mean you should all look and speak and act the same. Out of the generosity of Christ, each of us is given his own gift.
I always seem to muck announcements up. I'm still thinking about announcements. It's a good Bible passage, though. It's out of the Message. Here's a map of the world showing countries where armed conflict is currently happening. This is as of the 12th of October 2024. See the darkest colour there? It's a reddish-brown colour. That shows countries in which there's a major war going on with combat-related deaths of 10,000 or more in either this year or in last year. So that would be Ukraine, Syria, Palestine, Myanmar, Sudan, Nigeria, Mexico. The red locations are countries in which there were between 1,000 and 9,999 combat-related deaths. So we're talking about Russia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, Yemen, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Congo, Niger, Cameroon, Mali, Brazil, Haiti. I won't list the orange countries where minor conflicts have caused between 100 and 999 combat-related deaths, or the yellow sections there representing military skirmishes and clashes that have killed up to 100 people in the last year. These fatality figures, they include battle-related deaths, both military and civilian, as well as civilians intentionally targeted by the parties in an armed conflict. It doesn't include deaths relating from the famine, disease, and disruption of services that have resulted from the armed conflict itself. Neither side wins in a war, right? No one wins a war, maybe with the exception of the companies that manufacture weapons. And so, with everything that's going on in the world, I'd like us to just stop and pray for our world now. So let's do that. O God, author and giver of peace, listen to the cry that rises from this map, from every corner of this fragile earth, from our human family torn by violent conflict. God, bring peace to all those places where armed conflict is an everyday occurrence, not just the wars we see on our screens and in the news, but also the wars that we've forgotten about or never even realised were happening. Bring peace, Lord, bring peace in our time. Amen. It's kind of sobering, isn't it? The dashboard of our globe, I feel like it's got blinking warning lights all over it. It's scary. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I just feel helpless. I feel powerless. And I feel angry. And it feels like there's not really a whole lot that we can do. Conflict is inevitable, isn't it? As soon as you put two human beings in one space together, you're kind of guaranteed that conflict is going to happen at some point. It's just part of the human condition. And we have been going through a series. If you're new here tonight, we've been talking about what it means to be human. And we've looked at being human from all these different perspectives. And conflict is it's part of the human condition. It starts 3 chapters into the biblical story in Genesis 3. It escalates in chapter 4, and it just goes up from there. It's a reality of being human. And you know, churches, I think, have a hard time with conflict. There's a lot of expectation to be nice, isn't there? And not upset anyone. And that actually works for a while, until it doesn't, and then it goes horribly wrong. And people get hurt, and they get disillusioned, and they leave. They sometimes throw a grenade as they walk out the door to cause maximum damage to the ones who are left. Or else they dig their toes in and they stay, making it almost impossible for others to remain. And the cultures and the structures that have enabled or even invited destructive conflict just remain unchanged. Churches have a hard time with conflict. But as our passage says that Justin read, as a church community, we've been called to travel on the same road and travel in the same direction and to stay together somehow, to be permeated with oneness. I love that phrase. We're called to be a church, not just to go to church. And you know what? Conflict doesn't have to be destructive. In fact, when conflict happens, it can be an opportunity for a church and the people in it to really grow in maturity and to go deeper than just this superficial niceness that tries to include everybody but ignoring problems and differences. But thinking about conflict as an opportunity is kind of a risky thing, because conflict can blow a church apart. I bet a lot of the people sitting in this room have seen that happen. Conflict can blow a church apart. Conflict can also be a gateway to deeper community. So what makes the difference? Because I've seen both. One factor is if the congregation understands conflict, if the congregation understands how it starts and how it escalates and how it can be harnessed for good, whether the congregation is realistic enough to acknowledge that, you know, because we're human, we're probably going to have conflict. And that doesn't matter whether you're Christian or not. It's going to happen from time to time at church. Do you know, I think we can do that. I think we can understand conflict. We can understand some of the logistics around that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And just FYI, I bet you're sitting there thinking, oh, I wonder what's been happening. I wonder if there's some looming conflict that I'm not aware of. Denise knows about it and I don't. Well, as far as I'm aware, there's no giant looming conflict about to break over us like a wave. And that is exactly the time when sermons like this should be preached, right? So I'll just ease your minds on that. We've already acknowledged that conflict happens in churches by one of our ways of working together. And if you've been around for a little while, you're familiar with these. We've got these 4 principles that we came up with as a congregation, and this one is the second one, that as a diverse congregation we seek to value and respect the diversity of people, beliefs, opinions and experiences within our congregation, knowing that diversity makes us a better congregation. Actually, that's our ways of working together one, isn't it? Here's the one. This is number 2. We understand that conflict can fester and then escalate quickly. So we aim to handle interpersonal conflict early with vulnerable honesty and involve only the people who need to be involved. Yeah, that's yeah. So that's one of our ways of working together. There's a guy called Speed Lees, which is a really cool name, and he studied conflict. And he came up with this model that shows how conflict escalates. Now, I mentioned this about a year ago, but I think it's worth repeating and hearing again. I found it super helpful. He says that you can predict how conflict plays out. The details will be different in each situation, but the way that conflict escalates follows an utterly predictable pattern. So predictable that it will probably sound familiar to you. But this is the sort of stuff that we as a congregation can understand and help us to harness conflict for good if we understand, how it escalates. So you've probably seen this play out either at work or in a family situation or some community that you're part of. Phase 1 of a conflict is not actually a conflict, it's just a problem. So we've got a problem, sometimes between 2 people, maybe sometimes between 2 groups. It's not a conflict yet, it's just a problem, and a problem needs a solution. It's going to impact people if it doesn't get solved. So this problem needs to be solved. It needs some creativity, it probably needs some listening, some sharing of different perspectives in order to figure out the best solution. It might not be easy to find a solution, but with patience and perseverance and listening and a sense of fairness, maybe some compromise, some give and take, a solution can be found for the problem. And it often is. And that's where this process stops. And life goes on quite happily. But if the problem is not solved, something really predictable happens. The people involved in solving the problem start to forget that they're trying to solve a problem, and they start getting frustrated with the people that they're working with to solve the problem. And so instead of a problem to be solved, it morphs into a disagreement between 2 people, or sometimes 2 groups. And the initial problem actually starts to recede into the background. And suddenly people start saying things like, "You always do that." Or, "I hate it when you..." Or, "You're so..." fill in the blank, inflexible, irresponsible, argumentative, distracted, you're uncaring, smothering, naive, judgmental, stupid. Past disagreements and unresolved issues are brought up, and blame starts to be thrown around for those. And I'm feeling really hypocritical right now because I've been married for 35 years and I've said all of those things. At this point, what we have to do is do our very best to de-escalate by going back to the problem, going back to focusing on the problem, remembering what it was, remembering that what we're trying to do here is solve a problem rather than attacking the person. And we said that in that ways of working together. So if you're at phase 2, you got to try and get it back down to phase 1. But if you don't, what happens if the disagreement continues and the people involved are unable to bring the focus back to the problem that needs to be solved? Another really predictable thing happens. One or both of the people, or maybe groups, both of the people involved, they start to recruit other people to their side. I can see people nodding. I'm not talking about an approach to a trusted friend or colleague to seek help in a kind of a, "Hey, I need some help working out this conflict and I think maybe you could help. But you won't believe how she treated me. Or let me tell you what he said to me. She, fill in the blank, attacked, intimidated, blamed, bullied, abandoned me. Or he is so fill in the blank, inflexible, irresponsible, argumentative, distracted, uncaring, smothering, naive, judgmental, stupid. The underlying message of this is, would you please join my side? I need you on my side. If you're the one, and that's called triangling, we're trying to triangle another person in. If you're the one getting triangled in a conflict situation that doesn't involve you, do your very best to de-escalate by pointing the person back a level. Wow, that sounds like a really difficult conflict that the two of you need to work out together. Refuse to be triangled, because if you get triangled, you can guarantee the conflict will continue to escalate. And now you're part of it. Do you want to do that? No, don't get triangled. Of course, if you suspect that actually this is not a conflict between two sort of roughly equal people, this is a genuine abuse of power, or it's possible someone here is facing domestic violence, then you'll want to be a conduit to get them help. And I'm not talking about that scenario. If the conflict continues to escalate, we get to level 4. And it becomes more visible, and suddenly the whole situation can deteriorate really quickly. This is the phase where the proverbial spit hits the fan, where there is shouting and finger pointing at church meetings, where people storm out. This is where the conflict avoidant people leave. And those who don't mind a bar fight, they dig their heels in and they start gathering more ammunition. And once conflict gets to this level, it's pretty hard to de-escalate. There's collateral damage now, and there's no way the toothpaste is going back in that tube. The original problem, what was the original problem? It's just not even on the radar. And finally, level 5 is when winning is not enough. Now opponents have to be punished or destroyed, and all hope for reconciliation is basically lost. Conflict can blow a church apart. But conflict can be a gateway to deeper community. What makes the difference? Well, we've said understanding conflict really helps, right? And wherever we are at, trying to push it back down a level. But another factor is who makes up the congregation. Conflict can be the gateway to a deeper community if there are enough people in our community who are prepared to hang in there through the discomfort that conflict brings, through the hurt, through the frustration, for the sake of a gospel that says, because God loves me, I can love my neighbour. We don't need everyone in the congregation to be able to do that. We just need enough to get to a tipping point, enough to influence the climate of our church, enough to shape the contours of this community. Could you be one of those people? Conflict can be the gateway to deeper community if there are enough people who are willing to let go of their ego, to suspend their judgment of those they don't understand, at the same time as holding their own boundaries so they don't become a doormat. Enough people who are so secure in who they are that they can stand alongside those they don't understand and love them anyway. You could be one of those people. Because if we have enough people who can find the grace to listen when everything inside them just wants to defend themselves, if we have enough people who are learning to speak honestly without resorting to accusation or blame, enough people who are willing to apologise when they realise they've negatively impacted someone, even when that wasn't their intent, then we'll have enough people to build a church that won't be torn apart when conflict rears its head. We'll have a church culture that isn't based on superficial niceness, but a deep acceptance of people just as they are. Could you be one of those people?